Hello, everyone. I am Stephanie Lemick. I'm the founder and CEO of the Wounded Workforce, an organization dedicated to building trauma-informed workplaces. And I am so thrilled to have another amazing group pulled together to have a conversation about trauma-informed workplace benefits. It is October. This is our October panel discussion. So many people have benefits top of mind. So, super excited to invite this group to have a conversation about how benefits can be more trauma informed and how we can be more thoughtful about creating trauma informed benefits programs and processes. So, I'll go ahead and kick off and we'll have our panelists each introduce themselves. I'll go ahead and take a look at who is showing up kind of clockwise on my screen. And Sheila, if you would introduce yourself first, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. My name is Sheila Kruger. I am in Phoenix, Arizona, and the former head of global benefits for Zoom, and now doing consulting with startups.
Amazing. Great to have you, Sheila. And Sheila is a benefits expert for sure. Always love to have her insights. Tamika, it is so lovely to have you on a panel. Welcome.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm Tamika Allen, founder of Mod Culture, and where we're helping organizations create business impact through inclusive workspaces for neurodivergent talent. And after leading in people and talent for 16 years, I have launched that consultancy focusing on just that.
Amazing. Oh, so great to have you. Love your work. Justin, welcome.
Thanks, Stephanie. Appreciate you extending the invite.
Yes, absolutely. Will you go ahead and give a quick introduction for our listeners?
You got it. My name is Justin Clifford. I'm the CEO at Bereave. We've created a software platform to help people navigate loss both at home and at work, based in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Amazing. Yes, big fan of Bereave and the work you and your team are doing. Chantel, welcome. Great to have you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I am Chantel Sims. I am an HR leader, been in the field for many years, and also a consultant. I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to this discussion with the panel.
Absolutely. I am such a huge fan, and Chantel is also a certified trauma-informed workplace practitioner. So she is one of the amazing folks who have completed our certification. So grateful to have you on board and have you share your insights. And Jennifer, please go ahead and wrap us up.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Jennifer Laurie. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns, and I'm the Chief People Officer at StartOut. We support LGBTQ+ entrepreneurs, and I'm also the founder at Equitable HR Guild, which is focused on creating resources for HR professionals focused on more equitable ways of working.
Awesome. Thank you. Such an awesome group. I am thrilled for this conversation. I'll kind of kick it off. Those of you who have been listening to these panels, listening to me, know that I love to start from a place of shared understanding. So I'll start with a little introduction of our topic, where our focus will be, and then we'll kick it over to the panelists and focus on hearing from them and their expertise. So we know benefits are an important part of an employee's experience and total compensation in the workplace. And given the time of year, you likely have benefits top of mind. And open enrollment periods are either recently wrapping up or coming up soon. So today we want to seek to look at employee benefits from a trauma-informed lens and also discuss how to make benefits processes and offerings more trauma-informed. So on that note, we'll kick it off with our first question for all of the panelists. Why is this topic important to you? And feel free to jump in whenever you're ready.
Okay. Since no one else is going to talk, I'll talk. I guess for me, a lot of it is having been through so many open enrollments and then the follow-up when the plan year starts and the changes and everything that's going on with those plans, and how difficult it is for the employees to make those changes and learn the new processes if there's new vendors or if there's changes in the coverage. It's just something that I think we need to do a better job of looking at that whole process and saying, okay, I know I can't tell you how many times I've said I work in benefits, and I have times where I just want to scream when I'm working with my personal benefit stuff, because it makes no sense. And so I can't imagine that somebody who's, trained in programming or, is whatever, has the ability or the even wants to try and understand it or do all the reading and do all the stuff they need to do to really understand what's going on. And so I do think that a lot of times, we've approached the communication with open enrollment with more of a fear-based, like, if you don't do this, you won't have benefits. Guilty, done it many a time, right? And I just think there's got to be a better way that, we can work with people and talk to them eye to eye rather than, just shouting at them via email or, intranet and all those kinds of things. So it's just really one of those things that I think has kind of lagged as trauma-informed workplace and, psychological safety. Certainly getting an email from your employer that says, if you don't do this, you won't have benefits, not a psychologically safe kind of employment. So I just think there's a lot of work to be done here.
Yeah, Sheila, I share many of those sentiments. I've been guilty of a few of those things myself. One of the main reasons why this topic is important to me is because as I delve into this work and continue in making these spaces more inclusive for neurodivergent talent, we have an opportunity, and benefits is one of them, because 20% of our population identifies as neurodivergent, meaning ADHD, autism, dyslexia, right? There's research now coming, more recent research coming, suggesting that number could be as high as 30 or 40%, which means we have neurodivergent talent in our pipelines, on our teams, even on our leadership teams, right? As we continue to drill down in disability inclusion and this becomes more aware to the general population, it's important that we elevate this employee experience. Sheila, what you were just describing, myself identifying as someone neurodivergent, if I didn't work in the people and talent space, I probably would have an anxiety attack, right? Thinking about that and not understanding that process. So considering all the time that we spend at work, a significant part of our lives, and these conditions impact people in their day-to-day life, we have a responsibility as leaders in the workplace to improve this experience for everyone, but in this context, specifically for this demographic.
And Stephanie, I'll chime in just to keep the clockwise flow here. I think to answer the question of why it's important to me and maybe specifically to Bereave is I think companies, especially in the past decade and a half, have started to do a really incredible job at incorporating more benefits that support life outside of the walls of the workplace. And there's endless examples, but what has ended up happening is that most of those benefits are about the ceremonious times in life. And there's this big gap of the unceremonious times in life that benefits typically don't do a great job of supporting. And if they do support them, they're often tough to find or unclear because we struggle just as a society in talking about tough things. And because there are so many tough things that happen in life every day, it behooves a company to think about supporting their employees by supporting not just the ceremonious times, but also the unceremonious times in life, whether that's caregiving, death, financial hardship, any sort of cause of trauma or disruption to people's lives that is going to impact their job. If a company can show up and support them in those moments, we think they can win pretty big.
I guess I'll chime in next just to keep it going. But absolutely agree with what everyone else shared. And I believe everyone shared this too, but I mean, it's just an essential component of the employee experience, right? And also, in their well-being. And also, in the benefits process, it can deeply, impact individuals who have experienced trauma. As both Sheila and Tamika mentioned, it is almost like this, we're scaring people, gotta choose your benefits, creating this sort of undue stress, on them, which, can also impact those that folks that have experienced trauma. Also, as organizations, think about, aiming to be more inclusive in supporting, this is, adopting, this benefits side to more trauma-informed approach can really help create environments that promote, safety, healing, and well-being for our employees. So that's why this is important for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that exactly. I think it's an area that we don't think about a lot when we think about inclusion and equity and trauma-informed work, because it feels like very rote and very like fixed and just like not as much of like kind of like the softer side of employee experience. And I think, benefits is such a big part of an employee's experience of the workforce. And so when we're talking about trauma specifically, trauma affects so many of us. I would argue it affects all of us at some point in our lives, but it also, disproportionately affects a lot of folks like people of color, LGBTQIA folks, disabled folks, neurodivergent folks. And so when we're thinking about how those people are existing in the workplace and the way that they're experiencing the workplace, again, benefits is such a big part of someone's experience of, and even like their feelings about their workplace. And so I think thinking about it with that trauma-informed lens, that inclusive lens, is just really critical for kind of our overall commitment to equity, inclusion, being a trauma-informed workplace in general.
Absolutely. I love it. Oh, I knew this was going to be a good conversation. And you guys, I love it when you all prove me right. So thank you. It came up in a lot of our answers to the first question. So I want to pivot to talking a little bit about open enrollment. Open enrollment can be a stressful time for just about everyone involved, especially for many employees. How can companies apply trauma-informed principles to the benefits and enrollment process to help reduce anxiety and create a more supportive experience?
I think a big thing is, there's like the principle around agency and choice and empowerment in trauma-informed work. And I think that's really big in benefit selection. So making sure that people feel like they do have a choice and that there are choices, that you're not just saying this is the plan or this is the plan you should choose even. I see sometimes people recommending in like a very fixed way what benefits folks should have based on their circumstances. So making sure that you're really giving the agency to employees and giving them the information and empowering them that, if they have questions, of course, you're here to support them, but it's not something they're sort of like, this just thrust upon them and this is just the way that it is, but that there's a real kind of like dialogue, that they have time to be making those choices that end up being very personal choices for them.
I think one of the things that we did at Zoom that I found to be really helpful was we would have a couple of sessions about just here's the program for next year, just informational, set it up as a webinar, not even as a meeting. So no one could, we didn't take questions. We didn't do any of that. And then we had office hours where our broker and several of us from the benefit team would get on a Zoom call and people could just come and go as they wanted to. And if they had a personal question and they needed to ask about a particular drug or whatever, we'd put them in a breakout room with one of our benefit people or a consultant, and they could ask their question in private, come back to the bigger room and continue the conversation. And just having those kinds of sessions, I mean, they were always like wildly popular, and we almost always had to add extra ones because somebody would be like, well, you scheduled 2 and I've got meetings both of those times, so we'd schedule a couple extra ones, and it's so much more efficient. You can't, although you'd love to, reach out to every single person and talk about what do you need, what's really going on, what's your biggest concern about the healthcare, and how could we help solve that. But you can't really do that. It's not feasible. But having those kinds of open sessions was really great. And I think it was nice to have the ability for people to understand that they weren't the only ones who didn't get it, right? It was a very, it's very humbling to get into a room like that and say, I don't understand how this works. Could you explain it to me? And it was really nice to have the opportunity for folks to do that. And of course, if they wanted to talk to us one-on-one, we were happy to do that. But this was a way for us to really communicate about what their possibilities were without, not spending a lot of extra really time or money, but it was just incredibly efficient.
I believe another way to lessen the anxiety I think about is because we all think differently, we process information differently. So communicating in different ways. Maybe it's some pre-recorded sessions from your people team and having that a variety of ways to consume that content, whether it be on video, someone can just listen on audio if they want, having it transcribed, and really breaking down how these benefits work from a high level, at least enough for someone who isn't in our arena to understand it. And the reason why I say that is because, or suggest this, and I've done it in past roles, is because when it comes to neurodivergent talent, very few of us disclose. This is just the disability community, period, right? Unless someone can visibly see that disability, we're only 4% chance that we're going to disclose. So if someone is not disclosed and they're in an open enrollment situation, the chances of them reaching out to someone on their people team to potentially have to disclose to try to get a question answered around a benefit is probably slim to none. So us being a bit more proactive in that approach can help lessen that anxiety, helping those employees and benefits everyone to help them understand how those benefits work.
I think also it's important to be sure that we're giving employees plenty of time to be able to make the choices. I know that in the past, even I have also been guilty of this, being rushed to get the information out there, given a couple of weeks to make selections, got to get it in. And I think that's just not enough time. So just, maybe on the back end internally, HR folks just ensuring as much as possible that we are doing whatever we need to do in the back end to allow for plenty of time to give our employees to make decisions, because these are important decisions, and we need to ensure that they have full understanding and enough time to be able to make the best choices for them.
I'm just thinking about the 1 year that we had an active enrollment, and it really was like, you've got to go in, or you really won't have benefits, right? And I think for us on the team, it was 6 months later, and a gentleman called in and he said, hey, my wife just came home and she's pregnant, and I just realized I didn't do open enrollment last year, so we don't have any insurance. And that is, and that starts to kind of drive your trying to get to everybody. And what do I need to do to make sure everybody's in? So there's a whole lot of anxiety on the benefit team side as well for how do we really make sure that we're serving everybody? And, there's some really nice apps out there that kind of help with that, I think, and notification to people that they need to do something or that they should try something or whatever. But it's just, definitely, we all have the problem, and we all have seen the aftermath when somebody doesn't follow those instructions, which I think is why it's such a concern to us.
Absolutely. I think it's such an excellent point, Sheila, because while we want to make sure we're doing the best for our employees, our teams, and being trauma informed, we also have a lot of compliance to navigate when it comes to things like benefits enrollment. So finding that balance and kind of navigating that can be really tricky. And like you said, can be super hard on the benefits team. I think that's such an excellent point. So I want to ask, from all of your perspective, what gaps do you see that currently exist in traditional employee benefits that might overlook or even exacerbate the experience of employees dealing with trauma or difficult kind of periods in their life?
One of the gaps I see being pretty significant is regarding comprehensive mental health coverage. There are a high number of practitioners. I think I saw last percentage was like maybe 56% of clinical practitioners, therapists along that line no longer accept insurance. And so having benefits in place to where maybe there's an agreement, or maybe there is a either apps or companies who offer that independently, having those contracts with those companies to be able to serve employees who and that are trauma informed, because that's another piece of that. All therapy is not created equal. A therapist who is not trauma informed treating someone who has experienced trauma can be a bit more damaging, right, than helpful. So I know there are many practitioners now who offer sliding pay scales and things of that nature, but pulling that into a group plan, right, a contract with an employer could be more impactful, and it also becomes more accessible to those employees who have experienced trauma.
I would just, outside of the hardship, like you'll always hear me talk about all of the hardship in life. That is always seems to be a gap. I think it's being filled by a number of providers. But outside of that, choice for me always it has been a big deal. I went from being a single guy to being married to having children, and each one of those phases of his life was very difficult. Very different, not difficult, sorry. Yeah, probably difficult too. Very different. And I needed different things to support where I was in that moment. And while I think my employers have always done a relatively good job at providing as much as they could, it felt like there were things that were probably offered that I didn't utilize. And the next person maybe utilized those things and not things that I was using, right? So that flexibility and choice seems to be a something that is becoming more pronounced and realistic in the workplace. But that still seems like it is a very big gap, that even though you've got different tiers for different people of certain things, your package is still your package, whether you use it or not, right? And I would like my package to fit me and my family and my needs a little bit more than what has typically happened in my life.
Yeah, I was going to say, I also agree with that too. Same as well, Justin. I mean, I feel like right now, traditional benefits kind of assumes a one size fits all approach kind of deal. And, I see a lot too around the mental health, choices and options in these plans. Not to mention mental health choices and options in our society is limited as a whole to begin with. So there's that. But I would agree with that. It's definitely the choice deal. And I'm hoping that it gets better. I have seen some organizations sort of start to take matters, some progressive organizations start to take matters in their own hand and sort of, create their own supplemental options outside of traditional benefits to help support their employees. And I really love that. So.
Another big one I would say is that just making sure that providers are trauma informed. Again, like Tamika was talking about, mental health providers, but even, like primary care providers, making sure that people understand the impacts of trauma and the ways that people might have different needs. I think just in general, that's a big gap that I see. There's just a lot of providers that kind of cater to like a neurotypical, like a cisgender, all these different things that are sort of the norm. And so making sure that, and there's been a lot of great specialty providers that have come up over the last few years that are providing for specific needs. Like I think about Folks Health comes to mind, where they're specifically serving the LGBTQ+ community. But I would love to see more like kind of more just providers that cater to more folks that are, again, more inclusive and are making sure that they're working with culturally, informed providers, trauma-informed providers, all of that as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a systemic problem and not necessarily just around mental health, right? We don't have enough providers in any field that look like the people that need them, right? And because of the healthcare system just being so broken and reimbursements are, I remember when I was a kid, being a doctor was like the best job you could ever have because you're going to make all this money. And now it is not like that. I mean, you could still be paying off student loans for years and years because you're not making $500,000 a year unless you're in some really crazy specialty. So that broken healthcare system, all the way around in every specialty. It's one of the reasons I always was concerned about all the little groups that we had, the new vendors that would come in, and it was like, okay, well, that's great. You're hiring all the top, orthopedic people. So who's left for everybody else? Like, there's a whole conversation to be had there about if they're all working for you now, that means that if my friend who doesn't have access to your program has a problem, we know they're not getting the best care because you've got all the really, really good ones. So it's kind of a, I just go back and forth. I'm always able to play devil's advocate with myself. So I do go back and forth on that one a lot, but just the fact that we don't have enough providers, period. And I really do put that on the feet of the healthcare system, just not working the way it should.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, as we look at the systemic issues, the systemic challenges of the healthcare system and, the intersection of diversity and healthcare and benefits, it's one of those things. How can we be thinking about it as benefits providers, as employers, to help kind of navigate, as a cisgender white woman, identifying a therapist and matching it to a therapist for me is infinitely easier than someone who is a Black man, for example, traditionally has an incredibly difficult time matching to a therapist, something where it's like you hear the statistics, you hear the numbers, you're like, no one's going to go through that many iterations. And then on top of that, how can you go through those iterations of trying to match based on your healthcare program, your healthcare plan? It may not even be feasible. So I think kind of navigating that tricky point of how can we navigate these systemic challenges and then also be thoughtful of what can we as employers, as the benefit provider, do to make things better. I love the nuance of that conversation. So I'd love to, knowing this group has experience and has worked with a lot of different great benefits options, especially we've seen a ton of new benefits options popping up over the last few years. What are some examples of employee benefits that you're familiar with, maybe you've used, that can actively promote healing and safety for employees who have experienced trauma or employees that are actively experiencing challenges?
We implemented Lyra Health in 2020, right before the pandemic, which made us look like geniuses come May. And I have always, even now that I'm not at Zoom, I follow them. I love all the stuff that they publish. I think they do an amazing job. They are definitely aware of systemic issues with, providers for everyone. And they've done a lot to try and boost up their numbers so that they have the ability to find providers for everyone. But I was so impressed during COVID because they did a lot of really wonderful group programs that were completely anonymous. We got no reporting on them. We didn't have any idea. They didn't even say we had 5 people from Zoom come. We got nothing. And they were open forums where people could talk about loneliness, how the pandemic had affected them, if they'd had a loss during the pandemic. And then, of course, all these other things started happening. And so we had conversations about George Floyd, and we had conversations about the Ukraine, and everything that happened in the world triggered for them another set of group sessions for the next month to be able to talk about it. And I found it so amazing that they were so incredibly responsive. And of course, anytime there's something like that, that means if you call and you're a client, you can get that specific training for your team specially. So, they were already working in that direction, and you can absolutely call and say, hey, listen, I want to use one of my sessions for my folks to hear more about this. And let's talk about Asian Pacific Islanders and the violence that we keep seeing. And so I just thought that was, to me, that just was completely impressive. And then I had a conversation with Dr. Joe, who's their head of clinical. And we talked a lot about employers and how much of the mental health crisis is actually started at the employee, but at the employer level, right? So my thing has always been, if you get a really great mental health program for your people, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you do it, but don't break your arm patting yourself on the back if you're causing people to need that care, right? So if you're making people work 80 hours a week, if you're not staffing appropriately, if you're making crazy deadlines, if you're really, it comes down to, if you're not in a psychologically safe workplace and you're kind of taking advantage of those people, yeah, they're going to need that mental health benefit, and you better hope they use it, because if they don't, the outcome can be really horrifying. So I just think it's really important. And I loved that Lyra was looking into that and starting to work with employers to say, hey, let us help you figure out what it is that's really causing the stress. And if it's something at work, we'll help you figure out how you could change that. So big fan.
I'm a big fan on, offering benefits around, flexible work, flexible leave policies. So important to be able to offer that to our employees. It really does give both employees a sense of control and safety. Also access to programs around mindfulness and stress reduction. I have been in spaces where employers have offered employees, yoga classes, even, dance classes, listening to classical music, like live, during a lunch break, etc. It's been amazing. All of those are so helpful. I'm all about, working on your fitness journey. I am very much a fitness person myself. I wake up and that's the first thing I do every morning. I don't talk to anyone. I can't talk to anyone. I got to get my workout in first, and then I start my day. So I'm a huge fan of, well-being and taking care of yourself, and anything, any physical and or mental mindfulness activities to promote that is wonderful.
And to piggyback on what Chantel was saying, also around the flexibility, whether that be flexible work days, right? Maybe someone is much better energized in the morning until early or late afternoon. Maybe someone does better by starting later because they need to get that workout routine in, right? Or have that morning routine themselves. Particularly, I think about this controversial topic we often hear about on LinkedIn around employees being on and off camera. If they're in a video meeting, I think about how that can be a traumatizing experience to force someone, whether they have disclosed that maybe they're neurodivergent or not, to force them to be on camera when they're in the middle of sensory overload, right? To give them that option to take a mental health day. And I've had these benefits in previous roles. Or maybe it doesn't mean they take the whole day off. Maybe they're just slower to respond that day. Maybe they need to have more focused time and take it at a slower pace and still be there. So that flexibility I found is really key to create help safe spaces, as well as a opportunity for healing for the employee.
I'll lean into the leave component. There's a company called Cocoon that is a leave management platform out of California, and they've done a phenomenal job, I think, from all the policies. We look at a lot of bereavement policies and starting to see a lot more like empathy policies or compassion leave policies. And that's really what Cocoon to me has kind of pioneered, is the concept of a rolling 30 days for all of life, right? And just flexibility and inclusiveness, whether that is a bereavement that needs to be considered, or there's legal proceedings is a part of it, right? There's just a lot that goes on in life, and the ability to be flexible and trust in the people that you've hired is massive, right? You're spending all of this time recruiting and all of this money recruiting and energy recruiting, and you get the people in and often put some really strict guardrails around what they can and can't do, instead of just asking them to do the work when they have the opportunity to do the work and get the work done. So anything that helps lean that way. I'll also point to caregiving. 10,000 Americans turn 65 every day. The sandwich generation, as it's been dubbed, is in a really dire spot. If you are caregiving for young humans and older humans at the same time, but also in supporting those people and understanding not just that their schedule might be a little bit different, but companies like IoniCare, companies like Melly, that can really help support those employees and give them the tools and the resources and the knowledge to be able to thrive. Maybe not thrive, but get through those moments, whether they are short-term, long-term, whatever they are. To be able to sponsor those for employees, I think is a huge opportunity that employers have ahead of them.
I would just add to not a specific benefit, but again, that flexible kind of agency piece of allowing people to make their own decisions. I think there's actually some, I can't remember the name of it, but there's like a couple recent companies that have come out that offer bundled packages where employees can select which lines of coverage they want to opt in or out of and kind of how much. And some PEOs offer that as well. But I think those types of benefits are really great, where again, it gives people the agency and empowerment to make the decisions that they can opt in or out of whichever types of coverage and might suit their needs.
Amazing. Great. So thinking about, the challenge around communication, kind of navigating the balance of, supporting our employees and also the challenges, compliance, and, a very challenging overall healthcare system. What kind of resources or training should HR professionals or benefits administrators leverage to ensure they approach employee benefits in a trauma-informed way?
I think training on just inclusive language can be really helpful, and kind of communication skills in general. So things like just empathy and like active listening, being able to ask good questions. That's all really helpful. Making sure that, the people who are engaging with your employees are equipped to be, again, an empathetic, safe space for folks to ask questions or disclose that maybe they need this type of coverage or this type of care, and not feel like it's a place of judgment or stigma or anything like that. Even just things like using gender neutral language or not using like mental illness, but instead talking about mental health or mental health conditions. All of that is going to be really huge for people's experience of benefits. So I think if nothing else, like a inclusive language, sort of communication type training can be really helpful. And of course, goes beyond just open enrollment and benefits, but it's just helpful for everyone and how they engage with each other.
Jennifer, I'm gonna pop in on the word empathy. I don't know that there is a more necessary skill in business today, and that is going to be necessary for the next decade or two, than empathy. I always thought that empathy, you were pre-wired, either had it or you didn't, right? I have come to learn that it is a skill. I have been trained by a phenomenal empathy at work coach named Lisa Mertes here in Indianapolis, as a matter of fact. The impact that you can have, not just on somebody's life, but on their employee experience by being empathetic to some degree and becoming more empathetic through practice and sharpening that skill, I think is going to have massive impact on businesses, on the P&L. I've been in very empathetic workplaces for 6-7 years. I've worked for 2 of them, and it was a place where people thrived because they had the psychological safety. They understood that the employer had their back. And that created an environment where people came and wanted to win. They wanted to win together. They wanted to support customers. They wanted to work harder and better and smarter. And that was because they felt the encouragement through the empathetic leadership that they had.
I think that training also it begins with, defining also trauma, like what trauma, like its various forms, right? Like understanding what trauma is and also the various forms of trauma, and then also understanding the impact of trauma, like how it affects our body, the brain, and behaviors, like being able to identify that. All of that's important, like to start with. And then also, secondly, understanding trauma-informed principles, which I learned very well by taking your course and going through your certification. So there's a shameless plug there, Stephanie, for your course. So,
well, thank you.
To piggyback on everything that's been said, I was looking for this statistic, and I believe it was either from Gallup or Deloitte. 90% of U.S. workers believe empathetic leadership leads to higher job satisfaction, while 79% believe it decreases employee turnover. So to your point, Justin, it really should be a non-negotiable. And I would also add to, as far as training, maybe formal training, maybe also the training of life, of just learning how people show up in their experiences different than what we see in our immediate circles. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in conversations, whether it be internally in a position or just externally in industry circles, where so many of us don't leave those particular circles that we grew up around, whether it be no shade to those who may have gone to an Ivy League school or may have been in more privileged circles that don't understand those who may not have had that privilege, can help build that empathy in real life as well.
So I also want to ask, oftentimes when we talk about benefits, when we talk about resources that folks can leverage through our benefits programs, the often maligned EAP that no one uses, a part of that is we're so often leaning on benefits professionals or HR to be the promoters of these resources. But to pivot a little, how can leaders be, trained or resourced to recognize when employees might need some, hardship related or trauma related support that may be available through benefits? And how can we go about encourage employees to seek these benefits out without fear of retribution or exposure?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Modeling, I think, is always one of the greatest things. And if people are willing to talk about their experiences in the field of mental health, I think that's great. We were definitely to the point when I left Zoom that everybody kind of knew who else was using Lyra because we were always talking about it. And I think it's not just the paid leaders. You need to also kind of lean into your people that are truly people leaders that may not be managers. We heavily leveraged our ERGs to talk about mental health, and it makes sense because almost every one of our ERGs is somebody that's in a population that has so many more issues than Stephanie, you and I are going to have, right? And so it was really great to have that team supporting and talking to us and saying, hey, here's some things we need, and we'd say, okay, great, let's see what we can put together and work with them to bring that. So I think I think that's all of that's true. But I think again, the empathy is, that's got to be there. I mean, and unfortunately, I'm sure you can learn it. I wish there were some people that had learned it when I was working with them. But, every once in a while, you are going to run across somebody who just doesn't get it. They just don't. Nothing bad's ever happened to them. They've never had to miss a meal. They've never not had a car. They've never, all those things, or a job or anything. And so sometimes it's really hard to communicate with those people. And then it's kind of makes us think a little more about how do we talk to somebody who really is, in that kind of a position, and how do we bring that point home? And that's a really tough thing to do.
I think also it's important leaders to be trained in active listening, very important emotional intelligence, and also creating a psychologically safe environment so people feel comfortable sharing, right? If that space is not created for people, then they're not going to share. And then also, Sheila, what you mentioned earlier about modeling. Something that I do. I'm a very vulnerable leader, and I think that creates a space of comfortability for folks to share as well. So I think those are all very important, as well as, Justin has mentioned it. We all mentioned it. Being empathetic is so important. And unfortunately, yes, some people just miss it all together.
Yeah, I think I would. I definitely share the sentiments. And one thing I would recommend, whether it leads to a certification or not, any type of executive or personal, like actual coaching, right? It includes everything we've mentioned: being empathetic, having a growth mindset, active listening, learning to be curious and ask questions without judgment. The program that I went through and maintained my certification through is ICF approved, so International Coach Federation approved, was the CAP Institute out of Atlanta, Georgia. Valerie Burton is phenomenal coach, does an excellent job teaching the art of coaching. So the Coaching and Positive Psychology Institute teaches all of those things to leaders, whether they're external or internal leaders. I would think that would be a good first step for leaders to do to help them train in that regard.
I would also just say, if you have any influence over this, setting it as an expectation that leaders do work on these skills. Like, I think we very rarely see that leadership positions have a requirement of emotional intelligence and empathy and those types of things. And it might be hard to evaluate, but even just having it be something that, yes, we support, coaching or other resources to kind of help you build up these skills, making sure that it's something that is an expectation across the board for leaders, so that it's not just something that, like, oh, I kind of care about this, and so I'm going to go through the certification, or, oh, I've gotten feedback, and so I'm going to go do it. But it's like, no, everyone at the company has an understanding that this is something that we need to be upholding and building our skills around. I think is really big too.
There are two things on my mind that are certainly connected here. One of them is manager. I shouldn't even call it training, but manager awareness. Managers often don't know what is available because they only know because they went through open enrollment, and that's their exposure to what's available. And managers like me, who waited until the last minute every single open enrollment and probably picked benefits that weren't the best decisions. They're as close as I could get in the last 45 seconds of the day. Missed a lot of what was available, and I didn't know, right? We don't train managers on much. We certainly I don't think, do a very good job of making sure that they are aware of what is available, not just to them, but to their teammates. And if they are aware, then twice a year, maybe they brush up, and then twice a year they tell their teammates, don't forget, these things are available. I didn't know it. Here's what's available. Here's what you can leverage if you need to, and here's how to leverage them. Coming from that frontline manager is a lot different than coming from a benefits leader, a lot different than coming from an HR leader. And I don't mean to disparage anybody who is in either of those spaces here, but it is different. It's a different relationship and different expectation. The other thing that I was going to mention is, and it's very connected to what's been said, but having leadership make things okay to talk about. What is okay to talk about at work? We talk about making death okay to talk about at work a lot. Mental health in 2019, you didn't talk about it at work. You didn't tell people you had a therapy appointment. You didn't tell people that you have a therapist. You didn't put it on your calendar. 2022, people were unlocking their calendar and it said therapy, do not disturb, right? Because it was made okay to talk about at work. It was kind of forced on the employer to have to go do that, but I'm glad it did. And I think the more an employer can talk about it, whether it's at the leadership level, the manager level, an ERG level, the more you can talk about something at work, the more okay it becomes when that thing is needed in your life. I'll stand off the soapbox. Sorry.
I loved it. Man, no one better ever say that benefits are boring again, because I think this is one of the best conversations we've had. And I could go for another hour, but of course, I want to make sure and be respectful of everyone's time. So we'll wrap it up with a final question for each of our panelists. You know, if folks are listening in and they're interested in learning more, whether it's about benefits processes, empathy, trauma-informed practices, what do you recommend? If it's a book, article, podcast, anything else? And Jennifer, we'll go ahead and kick it over to you first.
Sure. So yeah, I recommend just doing some basic trauma education. There's a lot of great resources out there. I definitely recommend Stephanie's materials and certification and all of that. I think that's great. But just really that understanding of trauma that we were talking about earlier, I think is really huge. I'll also do a shameless plug for I have a resource that I launched through Equitable HR Guild. That's a open enrollment guide, and it gives you some questions to ask benefits providers and brokers, just to make sure that you are being inclusive and making thoughtful choices. So happy to share that in the chat as well. But yeah,
amazing. Love it. Thank you, Jennifer. Chantel.
Oh gosh, I'm reading so much right now. I think as I shared with Stephanie, I'm currently working on my dissertation for a doctoral degree, and doing it on trauma in the workplace. But right now I'm reading a really great book. Well, I'm listening to a really great book on an audiobook called The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's a great book, foundational book about how trauma affects the mind and body. It is so great. I really do recommend it. Also, again, Stephanie has a great website from the Wounded Workforce with lots of amazing resources. I'm on there all the time, reading and looking at your resources. So wonderful stuff. Thank you so much. And also be sure to follow Stephanie on LinkedIn. She shares stuff all the time.
Oh, you guys are making me blush. Thank you so much.
I'll use one because it's kind of hot on our minds right now. The New York Life Foundation every year puts out a state of grief report, and the findings are just so great, just as a foundational baseline level of understanding why grief is important to address in workplaces, in schools, in communities. I'm reading off the title of the article right now. That's why it went that smoothly. But really understanding the role that it plays, that grief can play in your employees, and how they show up at work, how productive they can be if they are supported in the right way. It is a powerful summary. It's a powerful report, and highly recommend it.
Tamika.
I also double stamp on Chantel's recommendation of The Body Keeps the Score. It is an excellent book. I think it's a good foundational start to understanding trauma, as well as Stephanie's Wounded Workforce as well, some additional resources. And I think a big piece of this is also including understanding who it is you're serving as leaders, right? Whether that be information that's been maybe shared from a candidate experience survey, and what are those demographics that are being impacted in your organization, and start there, right? So I'll also put in a plug for those leaders who want to understand. I'm a bit shocked, but at the same time, excited to serve in the opportunity to share and help people understand the neurodivergent community, right? And so I have a series that's in the midst now, but will be out and completed by the time this is released, called Normalizing Neurodiversity, where leaders can learn more about what those experiences may look like in the workplace, solutions they can start to implement, so they can have a more understanding. And I believe that understanding has shown a track record that it leads to building more empathy towards this group.
Amazing. So love that. Thank you so much. Sheila, wrap us up.
All right. Well, I just so you know, Lyra is not one of my clients, but they have an excellent blog, and they've got several articles about trauma and psychologically safe workplaces. So I highly recommend you handing over your email to them and letting them give you some really great information about that. I know there's a bazillion books out there that everybody can read, but I think one thing that I don't know that we ever really talked about is making sure that you're actually talking to your people too, to find out what it is they're looking for. It's pretty easy to sit in a room with a vendor and hear them tell, what all they're going to do for your employees, but you want to check in with the employees too and make sure that that's going to be something that's doable, workable, and really helpful for them. And then, of course, it wouldn't be right if I didn't recommend Stephanie. So I will also, I love following her on LinkedIn because I do love everything that she posts. So definitely doing that as well. So other than that, it's just been such a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this has been phenomenal. I cannot thank each of you enough for sharing your insights. I mean, we might have to have Workplace Benefits Part 2 based on how great this was. Thank you everyone for listening in. And I hope you will join us next month where we'll be talking about grief at work. Until next time, be well. Thank you.